It's time now for Countywide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join Paul David and Jen Cohen as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives in Yavapai County. And now, here's today's Countywide.
Here's the problem.
Welcome to Countywide. I'm Paul David. As always, it's great to have you in studio today. Two guests, Cottonwood Police Chief Steve Gazelle. Welcome back to studio.
Thank you.
And Cottonwood Oak Creek School Superintendent Steve King in studio. Welcome back. A few weeks before the school year ended, I was doing at least one or two stories a week, not from Verde Valley schools, but just schools in general in the state and in our Yavapai County, Coconino County area, where I was hearing this student made this off-the-cuff threat against the school or a student or a staff member. And then the next week I heard another one, and then another one, and then another one. And it just seemed to me, I seem to see this stuff happen at the start of a school year where things are, I guess, more tense when school starts, and then towards the end of the school year when kids are like, just let me out of here. But you hear these kids saying things like that, and typically the story is they didn't mean anything, they didn't have access to a weapon, they were just kidding. These kind of statements are made by the agency that sends me the press release, but not Prescott Valley Police. They've got the one where we take everything seriously. You know, if you see something, say something. If you hear something, say something. That's kind of their slogan over there. So it was. I think they had 3 cases over there in like a week and a half time, and I think Flagstaff had 1 or 2. And it seemed to me like I was getting a bunch of these, and so I thought I'm going to have you guys come in and I want to try to find how do we get through to the kids to let the kids know, and probably the parents as well, because that's where we're going to need a lot of help from too. Just the ramifications of saying that. When we were kids and we said something like that, I don't think too much would have been done. You'd have gotten in trouble. Mom and Dad would have known about it and things like that. But the ramifications for saying something like that today is far more serious than it used to be. Is that right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, for both of you, really, yeah. Both of you can answer that one.
Well, from the school side, absolutely. You look at, it's a different world we're living in, of course. We're seeing increasingly across the country. And the ramifications are serious, and we take every threat seriously. Law enforcement, Steve and I work very closely together, but when a report of this comes to my office and from the school, it starts a whole process. And the student is immediately suspended, removed from the school. And they have their due process rights as well, but they go to a hearing, and they could be long-term suspended for the rest of the year, multiple years, or even expelled from school. So their education is in danger, and it becomes very much limited as far as what their options are going forward, because what are the schools going to take those children? Because we have to look out for the safety of all kids, and that's the perspective that we work under. But every threat is we have to take seriously.
If I'm expelled from a school, what does that mean to to say Mom and Dad are taking me to the next school to say, okay, wow, you know, Tom got expelled from school. Let's see if we can get him over here. How does that work?
Those records follow you. Okay. So under Arizona law, if you were expelled from a school or even suspended, no other school has to take you. So you're very much limiting what you have going forward.
Okay.
And that could be for the rest of your school career. So you go to maybe online schools might take you, maybe not, maybe not. But it jeopardizes the rest of their school career. Absolutely.
Now, when a student does something like that, I'm imagining that a call goes into Chief Gazelle's department.
Absolutely. Right away.
So then, what's your role in this whole thing?
Well, I think it's important to mention the violence this is symptom of the very complex social issue that we still haven't figured out yet, unfortunately, in this country, of why this continues to happen, why it seemingly is increasing in frequency. And I think in different disciplines you see the paradigm shifts over time. Educational system certainly has changed their viewpoint. I think it's still in motion. I think Mr. King would agree with that. I think even ours is the way we respond to it. Certainly everyone uses Columbine as a marker of when things changed, and slowly, and that kind of kick-started this, and addressing the symptom or the actual event has been early on the focus of law enforcement, but as we've matured, I'd like to think, in law enforcement, we've tried to get more involved, as the schools have, in trying to address the behaviors, the precursors, the markers before the event, where we've always been response driven. There's an event, we now respond. I think over time, I think it's the important work is trying to prevent these kids from making these decisions to begin with. And as part of that paradigm shift, we have to, as the schools do now, take these threats very, very seriously, as do the lawmakers. There's some serious consequences in the legal system for making threats at a school.
So what happens to Tom? He made a threat. He's 14 years old. He's made a threat against the school, some teachers, maybe Superintendent King. What happens to him when one of your officers shows up? What's the process?
Well, there's a number of different options, but I think it's probably important for your viewers and parents out there to understand that the legal consequences that Steve just talked about, what potentially could derail your student's academic career. But then you have, kind of a bifurcated concern, if you will, of what's going to happen to them in the legal realm. And the threat is a Class 6 felony. We have 6 classes of felonies in the state of Arizona, 6 being the least serious, but a felony is a felony. Pretty serious.
Right.
And I reviewed it before I came over here to the statute. And it's pretty concerning that your student, for a prank or a joke, could end up with a felony record very, very quickly. And we don't want to start our kids. I mean, that just exacerbates some of the kids that are having these types of struggles. And there's lots of variables that generally go into the kids that do this, that are common threads that Steve knows very far better than I do. But the studies show that a lot of these common variables remain the same in these kids that do this. But what conceivably would have been a prank in our day is a Class 6 felony today, and unfortunately our society has driven us to a point where we have to address these very, very seriously.
I think we're all used to it. I mean, we're all guilty of saying stuff we don't mean to say. You get upset, you fly off the handle, and then all of a sudden my mouth opens up and really bad stuff comes flying out of it. And later on you feel regretful for what you may have said, but damage done these days.
That's right.
You can't pull that back, and that's the comment I hear all the time in the news releases that I get, is that they were just kidding. We just can't joke about this stuff, right? It's not a joke.
Yeah, and I think you see that overflow into other realms or corners of our society beyond schools. People say things online, for instance, that when they're called to answer for their comments, well, I wasn't serious. Well, there's still a damaging effect many times when those statements are thrown out there. And sometimes that may be true. The cop in me says many times that they knew exactly what they were doing. And the potential outcomes were desirable outcomes, and maybe there was regret afterwards, but the fact remains there is a detrimental effect to our society, regardless if it's a crime or not.
We'll take a break. Cottonwood Police Chief Steve Gazelle and Cottonwood Oak Creek School Superintendent Steve King is in studio today. This is Countywide. We'll take a quick 2-minute break, and we'll be right back.
It appears these hot ashes are about to be dumped, which could possibly start a wildfire. How will Smokey deal with such a hot situation? The garden hose defense. Next, a thorough stir. Then another spray. And finally, feeling if the ashes are cool.
Oh, yeah.
Ah, yes, the selfie. A ritual practiced so frequently with this tribe, but not so much by Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Making was a big part of the foundation of what I wanted my children to do and to have fun with.
Growing up in the Bushnell house was like Nutty Professor craziness. I know, that's true.
Getting burned on a hot glue gun, that was okay. Burning themselves with a soldering iron, that was okay.
I was 6 when I learned how to solder.
We learned how to paint, we learned how to sheetrock, and all these things had such lasting impact.
I felt that creativity would give them entree into being able to do anything they wanted.
Whatever we showed our dad, it was always the coolest thing in the world to him.
good ideas are very often considered silly at their onset.
And by that definition, we haven't even really grown up, you know? I mean, the projects have just gotten bigger.
We all make and have fun. Now the question is, why do you make?
Share your own Why I Make story today. Visit whyimake.org.
Welcome back to Countywide. We're talking about just the ramifications of today's students making a threat against a school, whether it be a joke or I didn't mean to say it, or maybe they did mean to say it, and they wanted it to be taken seriously. So those kids, obviously, you know, we've got a course of action they've got to go. Coming back from the show, though, I want to know, I wonder how many parents, grandparents, guardians, and so on and so forth know just what it means to them as well. When your student goes to school and does something like that, they don't handle this on their own. It's going to come back on mom and dad, too. Mom and dad are going to have to handle a bunch of this as well. How does that work out in the school districts?
Well, so ultimately, the families are responsible for the actions of their children. And so what happens if they're suspended, expelled, they start getting involved in the juvenile justice system? There's a probation officer more than likely going to be involved in that child's life. A judge is going to be getting involved in that child's life, but not just that child's life, but that family's life. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the child still has to be educated somehow, but the responsibility for that education of that child falls back on the family. And when you look at, you know, the chief made a very good point in looking at these different social factors that are happening. And it's complex. It's a very complex, and there are no easy answers. And somebody says, oh, just do this and you'll be fine. But we kind of operate in the principle, if there wasn't a problem, there wouldn't be a problem. So sometimes when we see what's happening with our children and some of the things that they're doing, oftentimes there are what you call those precursor events that are happening. And recognizing what those events are and putting in place the systems and the relationships and the culture of the school to steer those kids in a different direction, a more positive direction. And that's kind of what it comes down to is how do we build those schools and how do we build the culture there where we can help all those kids. But the consequences of if they do go that direction, they're dramatic and they're costly, both in time, in money, hassle. Everything changes in that child's life and in that family's life because it's the whole piece that they're looking at with that kid.
That's the point I definitely want to get across, too, is that it's not just the kid that's going to go through this. It's mom and dad, the grandparents, the immediate family, friends, and stuff like that. It's all going to impact them. And now I think maybe some kids think, well, no big deal. I got expelled, so there's online school. But then again, you can't be online school at home during the day if you're at a certain age, and especially if you're going through the court system, and they say, no, you can't be home alone. You have to have a parent with you, no matter what age you are, up to 17, I guess, right? I mean, that's juvenile.
Correct.
So,
which creates more strain on the family, as many of these kids are from a single parent family. The mom or dad that's the caretaker is working, has other children to take care of, and it just adds a variable that pushes the family to further undesirable outcomes. I think it might be of interest when we talk about common variables, and I had the unique experience of sitting on the Mingus Union School Board. I was a school board member. I was appointed for a year and a half, and we did our own disciplinary hearings, which is uncommon. Most school districts have a hearing officer. So I have a different perspective from that experience that, I sat there through, I probably participated in 10 or 15 of these disciplinary hearings. And overwhelmingly, and it's probably no surprise, but in my mind, I'm trying to pick up these variables. And I asked these long-time administrators, what is the ratio, gender ratio, male to female? Particularly in some of the threatening and what we're talking about here. And it's almost exclusively male, which shouldn't surprise people, But I think it is pause for cause to think what is happening just with that one element, because it's such a complex issue. But what is going on with the boys in our country? What is happening? Not to say they're the only ones that have problems, but certainly disproportionately it is off the chart. And then you look empirically, the individuals that commit actually carry out threats.
Wow, that's a whole different.
It's a whole different deal.
Road to go
what
down
is
there, right?
Just dissecting that is it's mind-boggling in itself.
Yeah.
And I would say that the common variable that we see with kids that are having those types of issues is there's a disconnectedness. There's oftentimes a lack of those meaningful, appropriate adult relationships. And a disconnection from a lot of positive activities. If they're not going to do this, then they're going to do these things over here. And one thing leads to another, to another, to another, until they do something really stupid, and they get into a situation where now we've got a bigger problem.
You hear about that. Parents, my kids, every sport that's even out there, or every after-school program that's out there, they are too busy to get in trouble. So that is a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a disconnection.
On the positive front, there is a positive side of this in this county. We have now a legacy program called the Milestones Project, which is, I want to say, a national model. A lot of communities are taking a look at it. Tim Carter, the county school superintendent, and Scott Masher, the sheriff, are intimately involved. Scott Mayberry,
Scott Mayberry retiring,
which I just found out the other day. It's sad to see Scott go, but Scott's been a huge driver of the Milestones. And what Milestones is, in the short time that we have, is it's focusing on intervention rather than reaction. And part of the historical issues have been these different disciplines being mental health, education, law enforcement primarily, and the disconnects in communication between those disciplines about, hey, I see John acting this way and so forth, even before you get to, hey, there's a crime committed, which is the historical point we come in, my profession, but and so we address those signs and symptoms early on. The only time we've actually formed, and the parents have to sign a waiver that allows us to communicate, because there's laws that that separate those that hinder, quite frankly, in many instances, our ability to communicate and find resolutions that would help the child or the family. Do we have school assemblies when school starts, or periodically throughout the year, where you have all the kids in front of you and say, okay, just so you know, and then maybe Chief Gazelle's there too, where you look and say, okay, these are the types of things that we just cannot tolerate in a school, and give them that heads up right at the beginning and say, hey, if you make these kind of threats, if you do this, this, and this, these are considered these types of, threats against the school, the staff, the teachers, whatever it may be, but they are not going to be tolerated, just so you know.
Yeah.
And with the parents there as well.
Well, not necessarily with the families there as well, but certainly with the kids as they go through what the baseline rules for everything are. But I want to go back to what the chief talked about with this Milestones. That was my first experience with it as well. This past year, I think it was in September, was we had this meeting. We had a young man who was really struggling, not necessarily with threats, but just with a lot of things. And we had concerns about maybe some crimes, maybe some mental health issues, and so on and so forth. And it was profound. Bring together Scott Mabry was there, the chief was there, Spectrum, April Rhodes from Spectrum was there, I was there, Mark. There's quite a few people sitting around this table, along with the family as well. And the results of that, with the plan that was created there, is that child is now back in school and being successful, because those interventions were recognized as being necessary very early. So you're absolutely right. The Milestones is tremendous in identifying what these kids are.
All right, let's take another break. Cottonwood Police Chief Steve Gazelle and Cottonwood Oak Creek School Superintendent Steve King in studio today. Stick around. Countywide back in just a couple minutes.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
How I define making? In the broadest possible terms, it is making something extant in the world that didn't exist. Everybody who's ever made anything is bringing something into fruition for a reason, and that act in and of itself makes us stewards of our culture. It's something that we're talking about. It's a response. Actually, it's telling a story. That's really what it is. And I include everything that could be made: painting, sculpture, welding, all of that.
Yellow is positive.
When a kid gets their hands on the world and learns that they can make their fantasy play, that they can make their reality, that's power. And as far as I'm concerned, everyone should feel that kind of power. There we go. If there's something that interests you to bring into the world, that's fantastic. Go figure out how to do it. Go tell your own story. There it is. And so I want to know why you make. Let's go.
Share your own Why I Make story today. Visit whyimake.org.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
Welcome back to Countywide. We've got just a few minutes left of the program. One thing I've heard from kids, and then I hear people say it to me too, is you're talking to me, I'm a juvenile. You can't do nothing to me. I'm a juvenile. You can't do anything to me. How do you handle that when a kid does that to you? Being a teacher especially, I can remember being hit in the back of the head by an eraser when I was a kid in school, but that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
That got me to turn around and sit up straight and pay attention to what was going on. That doesn't happen anymore.
Well, all I've got to say, and I want to hear what Steve has to say, is to me, it's more important what the parent says at that point than what the kid says. But go ahead, Steve.
And it's true, but there are consequences that are long-lasting. There was a case many years ago when I was a principal over in Camp Verde, and we had a kid. It wasn't a school threat, but he had gotten involved in the juvenile justice system for probably simple possession or something. And one thing led to another, and he ended up in juvie up in Prescott. And there was a situation with where he assaulted a guard up at the juvenile detention facility. And I talked to this young man's mom a couple days ago, and he's down in, it's not Florence, but he's in the state prison now for that very act that he was committed by a juvenile. And it's not a thing where you want to say, if you do this, you're going to go to prison. I don't do that with kids. That's not what it's all about. We're trying to build vision with kids and trying to get them to have a positive hope for the future. But there are serious consequences for these types of activities. And we say, well, I'm a juvenile. Well, sometimes juvenile acts carry over into your adulthood. And the habits and the patterns and all that stuff that you're doing when you're a kid are going to carry over. And what we're trying to do is break those cycles with these kids. And once they get to that, like I said, we want to stop the kids from getting to that point. And we do that through relationships and building these types of cultures within our schools. But if it does get to that point, what are we doing for them then? Because those types of activities will carry over into adulthood. And that's the last thing we want as a society.
Yeah. Okay, we've got about a minute left. Anything else you want to add to this? Parents, guardians, everybody needs to keep their eyes open for this kind of stuff, and then bring it to the head right away.
That's right.
We can, like you said, if we can catch it early, maybe we could steer that person in a much better direction.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to close the show. Is to you talked about the see something, say something, which is something that all of us should be doing about particularly issues like this, whether it's at the home or in the school or on the street. Is we see these behaviors that don't make sense, and that's, again, going back to the milestones concept. It's the same thing as talking to one another, and not just, I didn't think it was a big deal. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that in my law enforcement career after something tragic happens. And talking about these things and looking for those precursor events, looking for those behaviors, and go to the milestones. There's a milestones website, and it'll show for the parents and relatives, you can see some of the precursor behaviors that are indicative of causing concern in this area. And for instance, the activities, you guys have already mentioned that, the lack of participation, particularly in extracurricular activities, that's a variable. kids are not busy doing something positive, many times they will find something.
They will
negative.
fill their back.
Find all kinds of things to do. We're out of time. Chief Gazelle, thank you for coming in.
Always a pleasure.
Superintendent King,
thank you,
good to see you. Thank you very
is.
much. That is today's Countywide. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will talk to you again next time.